Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. I don't know how I get so lucky to be able to talk to so many brilliant people, but this is my life now. Today, I'm honored to welcome a person whose work is balanced precariously and perfectly between the scientific, the spiritual, and the mental. He seems to follow a path that leads him to the most intriguing synchronicities, and in doing so, while he is enlightening himself, he is enlightening us all. Michael Wann rolls through the world with grace and unmatched by most in the world of conspiracy and hidden truths, and we are all better off for his humble and profound sharing. Michael, thank you for being here. It is truly my honor.
Thank you for having me here. That's a heck of a introduction. So thank you. Thank
my
you.
honor. Before we jump into the episode, I want to tell the listeners that Rogueways is part of the Eyes Open Network, along with Breaking Basic and Talking Nonsense, two podcasts you should also check out. And we invite you to join us in the Eyes Open Facebook group, on the rogueways.org website, or in the Rogueways YouTube channel. We hope to see you all around. Also, as some of you may know, I've finally launched my Patreon. I love you all so much, and I do this shit just for the fuck of it. But if you want to support what I'm doing, I would love to give you something back for it. So go check out the offers I have for you and feel free to kick a little something my way if you love Rogueways or any of my other work. I appreciate you so much, and I thank you in advance, truly. So I start every episode with a pointless question of the episode. It's not always so pointless. I like this one a lot. This was actually your suggestion, Michael. And the question is, what is your favorite zodiacal sign and why? I think it's zodiacal, or do I say zodiacal? I'm going to say zodiacal.
I think it's tomato, but how is the second way you pronounce it?
Zodiacal sounds wrong.
Yeah, exactly. The first one sounds much more elegant. So
okay.
zodiacal, exactly, zodiacal. So, well, I would say Sagittarius.
My favorite.
Well, I think that's the thing which I think is so interesting about astrology is, like, for anyone who speaks the language, it's self-referencing. You're speaking it through your own astrology. And so, yeah, I got 4 planets in Sagittarius, and I'm partial to it. It sits at the top of the chart. It's the most philosophical. It's easygoing. It takes things in the big picture. And it loves humanity. So, yeah, I'd say that would be my personal favorite.
I love it. That's so true, too. How can you not look at the zodiac through your own zodiac sign? Mm-hmm. Like, that's what you are.
That's why it's so interesting hearing different people who speak the language astrology speak it, because they could look at the same information and underlying work with the same sort of, like, the basic ingredients, but it comes out unique to their own flavor.
That's a really good point. Like the infinitely accessible and infinitely interpretable science, sort of.
Yeah, or much more of an art. Yeah, like, I mean, there's a scientific aspect, but the art aspect is how, in my opinion, like, how subjective it is. It has to be. Like, if someone is going to go and interpret it, they're going to interpret it through their lens. And the fact that you're having an astrological conversation is immediately going to say you're definitely going to talk through your astrological lens. Like, you're not in any denial that such a thing can exist.
Yeah, true. So I want to say that my favorite is Sagittarius, but it's actually maybe Ophiuchus, which is the contentious one. What do you know about Ophiuchus?
So we're going to take a step back. Like, okay. Astrology is a matrix. Like, I know that. It's all a matrix. So I don't know what the matrix is. Like, I don't know, when I look up at the skies, like the white dots, like they tell me it's a star. I don't have a better description of what it is, but I know I see something. I know there are rules and stories around it. And if you understand the logic, you can then interpret. What exactly it is, I don't know. When you add the 13th sign in the zodiac, it completely changes the matrix. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but the way, like, the 12 sign astrological zodiac works is on a 360-degree circle divided by 12, and each sign has 30 degrees, if that makes sense. The pi pieces. So now you're like, okay, here's your 13th pi. Like, it fits there. It's the space in between Scorpio and Sag. But then I'm like, well, is there 15 less degrees here? Like, how is it evenly distributed? So because of that, I'm like, I'm going to stay in the world which I'm comfortable with. I'm going to just stick with 12.
Stick with no Ophiuchus.
Well,
So
exactly.
would you be Ophiuchus if Ophiuchus was a thing?
I believe so.
I think I do too.
But everything would change,
right?
I would imagine. I don't know, like the underlying fundamentals of the 12 sign system, and there are all these different systems. This is my opinion on astrology. It's astrology exists on a level beyond most of our one level above what we're living in. So we can't really explain it from being inside it. So whatever astrology is, there are all of these different systems. There's, but they have more in common than less in common. And whatever system like speaks to you, for whatever reason, it gives you good information, and it doesn't necessarily negate the other information. I don't know why, but that just seems to be the nature of it.
Yeah.
That's why I say it must be outside of what we're existing in, because otherwise we would get contradictions.
Right.
And going down the path of like and trust me, I've done it. Like I've gone down that path, and I'm like, for how I like to use it, that didn't serve me. So I kind of was like, this is a rabbit hole. I know it exists, but I'm gonna put a little sign and just like kill one to the next one.
I just remember there's two ways that I kind of looked at it. One was like, well, we've had this system for so long and Ophiuchus was never a part of it. So why would we put it in now? Like it works how it is. And why would we just throw this in? And then the other way I looked at it was like my conspiracy mind itself was like, well, what if it was intentionally hidden and suppressed? And so it's actually like the most important one, which was just really self-serving because I was like, I'm the most important one.
Well, that's the Sag.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think that is a higher truth. If I were to guess, like that would be based against like the 13th system, and just looking at our normal calendar right now at 365 days and 12 months, that's all jacked up.
Yeah.
And if there were 13 months and a couple small manipulations, the calendar would become an incredibly organized where, like, let's say the 17th is always a Tuesday. So if you said April 17th or October 13th, you'd be able to think that in your mind, versus right now you'd be like, what day of the week? If someone said like, do you want to do this October 17th? You don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes more sense because it's more harmonious. And there are certain meta aspects of living in a convoluted system. Like a calendar is another matrix. It's meta program. And we all exist. We build our lives within a calendar system. Yeah. And this calendar system is broken. It's illogical. Like
it's so illogical. It doesn't make any sense.
October is 8 and it's the 10th month. So, I mean, all sorts of like small things, like the rational mind's like, well, that doesn't matter. But the deeper mind is on unstable ground.
Always.
And so your foundation, like just being in the calendar system. So that being said, I think that there's probably another sort of zodiac, which probably is based upon 13. And then suddenly everything changes. And I'm not ready to go there yet, but I think you're right that it points to something deeper and more true than this 360 model, which is very Babylonian. That's where that came from, the 360.
Huh. So what, do you have any insight about the 360 degrees in Babylon and what that's about?
I mean, just like basic stuff. I know that they had a 360-day calendar, and I believe it was from Babylon or Sumer, where like the whole dividing the day into 12 hours, 2 times, 24 hours, but like AM and PM, all of these like 360 and divided by 12. I believe that's where that ratio came into play.
So, okay, now I have 2 more questions that are totally just based on this random side conversation. So one is, if we followed moons and just moons, wouldn't that divide the Europe perfectly? And how many would there be? Do you happen to know?
I think it gets a little bit more complicated because it's not
not
set. It's not perfect. It's about 29 days from new moon to new moon, or full moon to full moon would be the circle. So
it doesn't go into 365.
That's always changing. And so, I mean, here's the thing, which gets really interesting. Like, and this is when, you know, how I said, I'm not going to go down that path. They're like, we only have so much attention. We only have so much we can focus on. And there's so much that we could go and capture our attention on. And so the moon's another one. It's the moon's got a lot of weird stuff. And there's from a lot of different perspectives, there's a lot to indicate that the moon's not real. You know, it's artificial, whether it's just the fact, like physically, it's unlike any other satellite in the solar system. You know, it's closer to Earth and has a larger proportion than like
any other moon.
Yeah, no other. So it seems different, and we always see the same size.
Also, the only one that's in geosynchronous orbit or whatever, and that's why we always see like the one face.
All that stuff.
It's the only one.
It's in absolute perfect visual proportion with the sun.
That makes no sense.
So imagine this.
It's so unlikely.
We were kind of talking about this a little bit earlier before we started this talk. Everyone, like all of us, you can't help, like you can't unerase how our mind built upon itself, or our logic. We have all been taught from the very, very beginning that the moon is much, much closer than the sun.
Right.
Right. I mean, we know that. And so when we see it, it's impossible, even though you can kind of like talk yourself out of it. If you lived in a culture, if you had the exact same level of intelligence, and if you were never taught that, like let's say there weren't optics, like, you know, I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm saying this is how the mind works. And this, you would never think that the moon was closer than the sun. You'd have no reason to believe that. You'd be like, these are
exactly the same size.
They're the same thing. There's no reason you would come to that logical conclusion. I mean, maybe
you would just think one's cold and one's hot, and like one's night and one's day, and
exactly. Totally. So it's as I said in the beginning of this kind of like, you know, we're going down these side conversations.
I love it.
You can go. So you ask, like, well, what happens if I go and I use the moon as a calendar, and a lot of people do that, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the moon has an immense influence upon life on Earth in a very material way, you know, just from the tides and, you know, us being water and all this sort of stuff. It makes sense. But then you'd find out like, oh, but it's not real. And then you're like, well, do I want to go and do this? You know, there are cultures around the planet that all have these different legends of like the time before the moon, you know, and
wow, they do.
I don't know how consistent, but I know there are a bunch. If you were to go and search like the time before the moon legend, it's commonplace. I mean, I'm going to give you one more example of like the danger of the rabbit hole.
I love the rabbit holes.
Okay, so I'm going to go and add one more layer. And this is why you have to, in my opinion, why you have to at some point tuck your tail between the legs and say like, I'm not going down these rabbit holes anymore. I'm going to go back to the main trail I'm on, because the only reason I know about those myths, there's only one reason I know about those myths, and it's because the internet box told me so.
True.
And there's a chance, like, you know, I mean, that's how rabbit holey it can be. And that's not a grounded place to be. It's not a grounded, but what's kind of cool, in my opinion, and particularly about what you do and this generation of these podcast hosts, is they're providing a platform for like people like myself or other people who found one rabbit hole. And they're like, I went down this rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And let me tell you what I found out, so you don't have to.
Right.
Because it's fascinating. I agree with you. Like, I'm a sucker for it. In addition to like it.
Well, and I'm just the lucky person who gets to like learn all about it without actually doing much work. So
well, trust me, you're doing a great work, a great piece of the work.
Oh, well, thank you.
And that's part of it. It's like, you know, the old story used to be of the conspiracy theorist living in his basement, right? You know, cut off from the rest of the world.
Loner.
And in a very practical way, the infrastructure which is provided from like podcasts and the very, the very thing we're becoming is what allows that information to not just stay in the basement.
Isn't that weird? I think about that. We're using these tools that I know they intend to enslave us further with, but we're using them for something that actually is good, and in some level works against them, even if it's not, revolutionary. We use Facebook. It's meant to be like a data gathering system and whatnot, and we use it to create groups of people who can feel more empowered to continue thinking the way they think and questioning things. And I think it's powerful, especially when you can use the tools of oppression against them.
Well,
whoever they is.
Exactly. Like, who is they? Everything which we're talking about has, we'll just make it simple, two sides. It's got the shadow side and it's got the light side.
Right.
And what we put into it is what we're going to reflect back at it. And undoubtedly, this is my personal opinion. There is the calendar is a perfect example. We all live within the system of the calendar, and there's all sorts of stuff about that. And we could talk about it, but the bottom line is we still live in the calendar. You have to, and that shapes my reality, whether I'm aware of that or not. I don't think that's the exception. I think that's the rule. I think there are all of these different systems, and the calendar may just be a more obvious one, which we live in, and people we don't know gave them to us, and they have they're outside, whether this is metaphorical or literal, but they're outside of the world which we live in. And when we live inside it, we can't really understand their motivations. And so a lot of what we get is this reflection. And we are, there are people who are so in love with technology. They're like, I can't wait to put the neural link in my head.
Oh my God.
I can look at someone down the street and I can know, whatever, I got Wikipedia in my brain. And then there are other people who are like, this is the mark of the beast. This is what was said in the Bible that I should be concerned about. And these are the end of times. And like, it's the same thing. The system is made that way. And the internet's just one more example. I think about that a lot. I spent some time, I used to be very, very, very adamant about keeping a distance from technology. Before that, I used to be an early adopter. And then I reduced my technology consumption by 90%. And now I've eased back into it out of almost necessity. And I can see within me, like, its effects. I'm like, I don't like this, then this is just part of this dance where I have to learn to harmonize. And I think that's true for all of us who haven't completely rejected the system, because there's certain things which are very, very beneficial.
Well, and you can't, it's kind of like this metaphor, like you can't like go into the cave and drag someone else out without being shadowed in darkness for a moment, right? So like, I think if you want to interact with society and humanity and affect it in a beneficial way, then you have to at some point like be touched by darkness. You can't do it unscathed.
Yes, I think a lot about I'm no biblical scholar, but there's a passage somewhere about walking in the valley of the shadow of death.
Oh yeah, that was my first poem I ever wrote.
There we go. And again, this is what I'm thinking it says is like, when you are wrapped in God, you can walk through the shadow of the valley of death and you're unharmed. And I think that's a universal truth. What's not universal is like how you define God.
Right.
But like that sort of, when someone is in true harmony with something which truly is in harmony with what we think of as the concept of universal or God, like, you're kind of untouchable.
Yeah.
But that's true. It's a hard path to walk.
I love that feeling.
I think we all do.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the moon thing again. So what do you think if the moon is intentionally represented to us as something that's much closer and like I would say we approximate proximity to importance or to connection or whatever. So we probably feel like in a way more connected with it. Or what do you think like the effect of that is on our psyche or our worldview or whatever?
We can go and look, and we can logically deduce that the moon influences water through tides. Right. Okay. And we know that we're mostly liquid.
Right.
So it has to have, if you can see what it does in an ocean body, proportionate to our body. Like, so imagine this. Imagine you are on let's say you're in an airplane. So that's something which is true. Everyone here who's been in an airplane knows what it looks like when to look down when you're at a high altitude. And imagine from the high altitude being able to see the difference between high tide and low tide. Like that detail you can't see from 25,000 feet or 30,000 feet in the air. But when we are on Earth, when we're like right on the coastline, like, yeah, like this is where it is at 12 o'clock, and this is where it is at 7 o'clock, and there's 15 feet difference. Yeah. You can see that. So my guess would be the moon has that same proportion of effect within everything, like including our body. So us being in our body, we're like, I don't feel my water being pulled like to this or that. But I'm like, well, the equivalent of being 25,000 feet above you, then true. Or that's how you're seeing it. But when you're down in your body or maybe on the cellular level, like maybe it's that big of a change. Like that seems to make sense to me. And I think it affects us. It affects us, different people more intensely. I think astrology tends to be a very, very good indicator of your relationship with the moon, but it is, I would say, impossible to be made of mostly water and not impacted by a mechanism which moves water on the planet.
Right. And then if you are mentally associating it with something that's like more powerful, then it's probably going to affect you even more.
When you're when you're aware of it, definitely. When you're, I mean, that's true with everything. That was the entire, we talked about Babylon. Let's go back to the ancient world. They understood cycles. And so what they did was they aligned life to greater cycles.
The yugas?
I'm sorry?
Like the yugas?
No, like the rising of the sun on the solstice,
or
the like cycle, like very, very tangible cycles. And main boulevards of roads would be in alignment, or anything you could think of would be in alignment in any way which you could consciously kind of think about it. And the purpose is like, I want to put my smaller life in harmony with the greater life or with the larger life. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
Totally. We don't have anything like that in our culture at all. Like people don't even see the stars sometimes in their life, which blows my mind. Like if you're born in a city, you live in a city and you don't leave the city, like you probably don't really see stars. And, then you go out to like Utah in the desert and you see like the Milky Way and you realize that the Milky Way actually has purple and green in it. Like you can see it with your naked eye. Such a different experience. I don't know. It just blows my mind how disconnected some people can be from our surroundings.
That is an experience I'm still waiting to have. I think about that all the time. I've never actually seen the Milky Way with my actual eyes.
You have to.
And I think exactly what you just said. I'm like, that's an experience which I don't have in my nervous system.
It blew my mind. Like I remember seeing the Milky Way when I was a kid a lot more than I do now, because I think there's a lot less light pollution and probably air pollution and who knows what. But I didn't see any colors in it. It was just this splash of, denser, whiter, like milky across the sky. And then not last summer, the summer before, I went to Utah with my best girlfriend and we went camping out in the desert, and they have the Dark Skies Initiative. So it's purposely no light pollution and you're much higher up. And it's just a really stunningly clear sky most of the time. And so we got to see it a couple nights, but one night it was so perfectly clear that I realized it has color in it as well. And it just like blew me away. And I was like, God, I wonder how much clearer it even used to be if you had like zero light pollution or zero air pollution.
I agree with you. I think about that a lot too.
And then
You
the
know,
effects of disconnecting from that and not even being aware, like you're saying, you never even seen it. Like, I don't know. Yeah, there has to be something special about that experience that affects you in some way.
well, it certainly does, and you know, we could flip that upside down or backwards. Of the point is, we're still the same individuals, and that level of connection we're having with something else,
Yeah.
and that's, to me, that's one of the most interesting uh, interesting perspectives someone can bring right now, is recognizing that what we think of as life, what is normal to us, what we have been born into, is so drastically different than, at least since recorded history, like the amount of speed, the speed of the change, of the additional new ways of living, and then actually what these ways are. They are it is affecting each and every one of us, and we don't really understand it because we don't have anything to compare it to. But from that sort of reflection and thinking about what you just said, is like, you know, there was once a time this was the norm. That's not the norm anymore. This is the norm. What does this do? What do I do now that I live in this? This is something which is happening, and I don't have answers to these questions, but I think at the very least, what it does is it brings a degree of wonder, a degree of like, this is a special time, and maybe uncomfortable, but like, this is the time which we're in. I mean, there's even yes, this is, so that's the flip side, and balancing the two, because, you know, there's a part of me which is very uncomfortable in how things are changing.
Yeah.
There's also a part of me.
I feel like it's very, what's the opposite of life affirming?
Well, it is. It's very death affirming.
Death affirming. Yeah.
It. I mean, this is the narrative in my mind, or at least the one I hold now, is we are living in this time period of the overlap from one way of life on this plane to another, or maybe you could say it the other way around. We're going to another plane. Whatever it is, things are changing. There's a lot of stuff that's dying, and there's a lot of stuff which is happening. And where you put your consciousness is really going to be, you know, look at the Earth. We have above the equator, the toilets, they flow counterclockwise, and below it clockwise. Like, that's your inversion. That's part of like this thing. So we can be focused on the inversion, the destructive element, which is again, you could see that in an astrological chart, at least an interest in it. And then there's the focus on what's being creative. What are you going to create?
Yeah. True.
And that's where the exciting stuff comes into.
Well, that's interesting, because I've been really, I keep coming across this idea lately that humans are actually have this infinite creative potential. But that's another thing that we're cut off from in our natural selves, because we we're taught to devalue sex and sexuality, and to make it something very, if not like just straight up mechanical, then really, I don't even know the right word, degraded, just super degraded. Like, no, I don't know hardly anyone who would look at sex as a sacred thing. I keep bringing this up, and I hope people don't think I'm like a broken record, but I just think it's fascinating to think of, like, what if you did look at sex? What if you were taught to view sex as something sacred, and to realize that creative potential, like, not can you only you literally can create humans, right? Like, duh. But that energy doesn't only have to be, I think, put into creating a human. I think it can be put into creating who knows what else. So, and I think that's something that whoever they is, again, like, know and have done on purpose. There's a reason why porn is like the norm, you know, and it's just saturated in our society.
Yeah.
It's on TV, it's on commercials, like, it's everywhere.
Yes. Like, wow. I don't know. I don't
Sorry
even
to
remember
throw that
how,
at you.
I don't even remember how we made this 90-degree turn, but okay, let's go with it. So I agree with you completely in every single point as it relates to how the sacredness as it relates to sex has been has been taken, because there was once a time people understood that, and there are
I think
cultures and
so.
times. Oh, they definitely did.
Not even that long ago. Like,
I mean, all sorts of things. Like, I mean, you could go back to like the spiritualist movement. I think it's part of the spiritualist movement. Like all of these. I have a friend who's a religious studies professor, and he like knows all the details. So I probably got the detail wrong. But about in the 1800s, like throughout Pennsylvania, there were these very, very religious sects, and they would have like a full Sunday of in the church, and they would build up the energy, and then would turn into 24-hour orgies. And like you have all of these cults of like all of the mystery schools, like of Greece, and like Dionysus, is that how I pronounce it?
Dionysus, I think.
Dionysus. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Dionysus. Like these were sex cults, and so much of the ancient world was recognized sex, at the very least, saw sexuality in a very, very, very different way.
Right.
And there's all these different tantra movements which are happening now, like the new tantra, and that's like a re-approach to these ancient practices.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a funny story about this?
Hell yeah.
About this area? Okay, all right. So, and it's funny that you brought this up. This is really, really funny. So, you've read a couple of blog posts I've put online as it relates to a trip I took to Peru 10 years ago, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
which you could tell that story too if you want. That'd be fascinating.
So I'm gonna go straight to part 3. I wrote it, and then I absent-mindedly deleted it.
No, I hate when that happens.
Well, that's my process. Like is that was not the version, and so but it primed the pump. Like a lot of times I'll write things a couple different times before they come out, and so there's like that's a pain in the ass, I'm gonna have to go write, that was 1,500 words, but if this was important enough to me, then I wouldn't have let this happen. Like there's a part of me, so I trust that. I trust that process.
I love that.
So all right, so this was part 3. So part 3, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story because I'm going to write this again, but the bottom line was, it was the first, my first ayahuasca ceremony down in Peru. And there was the curanderos, the healer, the shaman. She was a woman. She was probably, I'd say, like mid-40s, maybe like 4.5 feet tall, and like really, really, really solid. And she was like all business. Like sometimes you see, there are all these different sort of archetypes that the different healers bring, but she was like this really, really like kind of like serious woman. So what happened was, throughout the ceremony, or as the ceremony started unfolding, I needed to step outside because it was too intense for me inside. Okay. It was too intense. And so I was outside with one other person, just in the jungle from the ceremony hut. And then it was my time to return in, because the healer it was my turn to be sung to. She sings in Icaros.
Okay.
And I don't really have a point of reference to like what is normal protocol for a variety of reasons. It's my first time, but then like, so, and I had been outside. I haven't really kind of witnessed, and I had not been strucken as hard physically as a lot of the other people who were just kind of like passed out, like as they were being sung to. So I'm on my knees. So I'm like, I'm in a somewhat lucid state. I was sitting up on my knees. And so this woman starts singing to me, this 4'6". I'm like, me on my knees, like puts her a couple inches taller than me, like we're eye to eye. And all of a sudden, I start dancing with her, like on my knees, like not really dancing, but I'm moving in a very kind of like dancey sort of thing. And it became this this almost erotic dance between me and the healer. It wasn't sexual, but there was an eroticism, like and it gets to the point where she reaches over and she grabs the back of my shirt and she dumps water on me. And then she goes on to the next person. And then so fast forward, all sorts of different stuff happens. And then I have the second ceremony 2 nights later, and all of this information is like, a lot of this is however you want to describe it, but
it's like downloaded.
However,
Yeah.
exactly, wherever it comes from. And everything which I was receiving was along the lines you were talking about. It was very much about like the sacredness of sexuality and how it can, and how it doesn't have to even be expressed sexually, but just like a different way of looking at it, which which was kind of kicked off between this dance between me and this shaman lady.
Yeah.
So then I was so the whole thing, like a big part of the experience of being in a retreat center for a long period of time is you really begin to develop deep relationships with strangers very, very, very quickly, and sharing is a big part of it.
I can't imagine.
And so it happened to also be like the off night. You would have ceremony, and then you'd be off, and you'd have ceremony and off, and so forth. And so the off night after the third ceremony happened to be the night of my 40th birthday.
Oh, wow. Happy birthday.
well, I mean, this was 10 years ago or 7 years ago. So I have an air for the dramatic, let's say. So I'm like, oh, like normally where people would share, I was like, well, I want to share with everyone exactly at the time of my 40th birthday. And I kind of made a big deal. And what I was going to share was like all of this different stuff, which was kind of being downloaded to me along this topic. So we go into the ceremony hut, and like, you know, everyone's kind of excited. There are probably like 15 people are part of this group. And at this time, it was dark. It was pitch black, and we didn't even light candles. And so I start talking, and something strange happens when you're talking to a group of people and you don't have like visual feedback. Like you don't really know how you're like responding with the audience. And I'm talking, and I'm not certain exactly what I say. But like,
because you're high, or because you were like so lost in the moment, or
probably everything, because the entire time we weren't in the medicine that night, but there's a cumulative effect. Like even when you're not like in acute medicine, you're still in that space, and you're in a foreign land, and everything is like discombobulated, and plus the fact, like, you know, I can't see anyone. I start talking, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm done. And then I hear this voice, and it says, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this conversation. And then this other voice pops up, and they're like, yeah, me too. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, everyone's uncomfortable with what I'm saying. And I'm like, oh my God, what the hell just happened here? and like suddenly, like I'm like instantaneously, like I'm the weird guy in the group. And I know where I was coming from inside. I'm like, I'm not going to go and justify what I'm saying, but for some reason this isn't resonating. And I'm thinking, I'm like, who the hell goes all the way down to Peru to an ayahuasca retreat, yet still alienates these people?
Right. I was going to say, like, how could this even happen if you're like doing ayahuasca in the fucking jungle?
And it was funny, because I went from being really, really having this rich part with the group to then like the next day of feeling very, very much like disconnected, or like a pariah. And there are a couple of people who would like pull me aside. This one guy pulled me aside, and he says to me, "It's like, well, you were saying, dude, it really sounded like you're trying to start a cult." And I'm like, you realize we're living in we're in the jungle, and we're talking about a serpent goddess named Madre Ayahuasca, and you're thinking that I'm talking about a cult here. It's like, you know, but that was part of the whole sort of, that's the beauty of, in my thoughts, of like going down to like an extended period of a retreat center, because a narrative plays out. Yeah. And that was part of the narrative, and like everything came full circle. But I don't even know how we got into this area. But
sorry, go ahead.
That to me was what the stories I was going to share was, like, you know, going through that and having this amazing connection, and then being disconnected, and then how it all comes back home. So I'm definitely gonna put that down on paper, because it's a fun story. It's a funny story, and it's a deep story.
Well, it makes me wonder too, like that. It's almost like a little I just feel like there's this like microcosm, macrocosm thing going on, and you guys sort of played out this drama where like if you are to like if I went to a just random group of people and I was like, hey, do you guys feel like sexual energy is just really not treated as sacred anymore? They'd be like, whoa, weirdo, stop talking to us. Like, what are you trying to do? So maybe that's like you're playing out that sort of societal discomfort with even talking about the subject.
I would agree with that 100%, and I would agree with that's what probably happens. Like, whether it's ayahuasca, whether it's like something like that, anytime where human beings get together and they have an intention of having like a deep experience, and like whether or not it's just from fasting or whether or not it's from a medicinal brew, something happens. And one of the things that happens is a narrative is going to play out from the collection of everyone who's there, what they bring, and part of it is going to be the different variables of each of the individual, but they're also playing out part of this larger story, which is happening across the globe.
I totally agree with that. I actually think that happens in like every interaction we have, whether it's like medicinal or not, or you know what I mean, whether it's even intentional or not. Like when you're in any kind of a group setting, especially, you're doing that. And I feel like that's a way that we can work sort of like a very practical magic or like our strong medicine, that we're bringing to the world, is just by being ourselves in those situations and kind of helping to, I guess, like ease along whatever process is happening without like running away from it or shutting it down or ignoring it.
I agree completely. There's a phrase, and I guess you could even say a movement, which is life as ceremony. And that's literally approaching the most mundane aspects of every part of our lives as recognizing like there is something miraculous in every one of these interactions. There is like everything. I mean, this way of thought applies to almost every type of spiritual practice. Like ultimately it's reaching that level of everything is. And yeah, I think that's, I know from my own personal experience, there are times where I like really get into that groove and I really dig it. And then there are times in my life where I'm like completely out of that groove. And I'm like, I got to get that back. I got to refine my practice, if you will.
True. I really like thinking about it that way too, because it also connects with that idea that you want to like always be here now, like be in this moment as fully as possible, because whatever your idea of how things are supposed to be or where you're supposed to be headed or whatever, like you're here right now. There's a reason for it. So like engage with it. And the more fully you engage with that, and the more consciously, then probably the better results you're going to have.
It's yes. Yeah. And like, so we talked about this a little bit before in the call, or how we were saying like on certain levels, like everything is simple, like the rules of the game should be simple. And so when the rules appear complex, like, maybe it's because, but then I do think there is a inherent paradox to learning how to walk the tightrope. And as you're saying, like I think, that's definitely a big buzzword about being present. There's definitely something really, really important about being present. When you are completely present in an event, you are completely lost in the event. So look at a dude with his iPhone standing on the corner, and he's as present with that friggin' iPhone as anyone can be. And he's like, look, I'm being present. I'm right here and I'm doing this. So like there's this dance between like being present, but then also being disassociated. We know disassociated is a negative concept also, but it depends upon the context. And to me, there's this like dance, and this is how I think you get into the how you can authentically, and when I say authentically, like it being real, like you believe it, you say it and you act it, of this life is ceremony. And it's like, I'm completely present, but I'm completely detached at the same time. And like, that's the paradox. And like each person needs to figure out like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And like, well, I don't know. I know what it means for me, or at least I know what I'm trying to for me. And part of, us being individual, that's why astrology is kind of cool, is like you can see that in a way, is how do you find whatever this balance point is where you're like, you know, you're in the world, but not of it. I think that's another way of saying it.
Ooh, true. So it makes me think of this experience you can have in meditation, or probably non-meditation too, but I've only experienced it in meditation, where you realize it's like you realize you have this level of consciousness that we probably have going on right now, where we're like aware of what we're doing, we're very in our body and we're whatever. And then you have like the part of you that's kind of like behind that, where you're like, I guess it's your like kind of deeper psyche, your subconscious, where you can like watch yourself doing that almost. But then there's like something even further beyond that. That's like this like fucking super, I don't even know how to describe it. Like you're saying that like disassociated, detached, almost like very I don't know how to describe it. And like that experience, if you could have that all the time, like I feel like you would be that exact tightrope. I don't know how you can, or if you can.
I mean, you're kind of describing also like experientially, like brain waves or brain states, like, you know, alpha state, beta state, delta. I don't know, like the specific one you're describing, but I would imagine, like, I mean, that's all of these biofeedback mechanisms. This is all like MK Ultra stuff. Is like, I want to go and see. I mean, MK Ultra is just inversion of this process. It's a weaponized version of true inner alchemy, but it's the underlying logic is legit. So like part of it is understanding like what does it feel like, look like when I am in these states where I'm able to have certain, I interact with reality in a certain way. I'll tell you, can I share with you like my personal practice?
Please do.
All right. So, I've meditated for a long time, and like I do, it's a discipline. It's like, you know, eating a balanced meal sometimes, you know, like you do it because you have to, but there's something I do, which is my favorite friggin' thing to do in the whole wide world.
Oh, now I'm super excited.
So, and this just ties into my own journey very, very purposefully. So I don't know if this is universally the most fun, but right around age 40, I've always loved bikes. Ever since I was a kid, I loved bikes. I remember being like in elementary school, and I would go into the BMX store and just like lust after like different components of bikes. So, but despite always liking bikes, I could never ride with no hands. It was my secret shame. It was my secret bike shame.
Your eternal failure.
And so at age 40, so there are two things right around age 40, two things happened. So one was I had this neighbor, Mark, and Mark had a lot of qualities, which are probably not the most becoming of a human being, but he had certain qualities, which were the most outstanding human being qualities I've ever seen. And one of his was he related to the natural world unlike anyone I've ever seen.
Wow.
Like he would tell me stories like this is true. Like this is a dude from the suburbs of Lancaster, and how he spent one summer living in the wilderness when he was in college in Australia, or not Australia, Alaska. And he climbs out on this ledge, which is like only like 3 feet wide, and it goes over like a 15,000 foot drop, and it goes out 30 feet. He's like, I had to go to the edge of that ledge just to touch it. It said it took me 3 hours crawling. It was the most frightening thing, but like he's got that in his experience. He's all this sort of stuff. So I used to always like to go hiking with Mark, and Mark could ride this bike. He was like this kind of goofy suburban guy, but he could ride his bike with no hands through like these small openings and not even flinch. And I'm like, he's got something I can't have. And at the same time, I see this guy who looked like he was a zombie. I mean, he was either was a hallucination from me, or this guy was like a friggin' heroin addict. But he looked all washed out, and he's riding a bike with no hands going against traffic on a busy road. And I'm like, he is holding the bike in the most graceful way I've ever seen. I'm like, despite the fact that he looks like a junkie.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is what I want to learn to do. And so I've spent like the last 7 years just like riding a bike with as much consciousness of like with no hands. And I've gotten really friggin' good at it.
So you can do it now.
But So why I do it and what I've learned from it is, when you ride with no hands purposefully, and I'll ride for like, there, what it does, and in what would be seemingly dangerous situations, is in order to do it, you have to be on that edge. You have to be aware of everything, because there's so many things that can knock you on your ass.
Yeah.
But you can't be focused on anything. And you have this immediate feedback mechanism. And that's like, you're either on the bike or you're not on the bike, or you have to put your hand on the handlebar or not. But you're always getting this feedback. The only way you're able to do that, like what happens is, like I'm tall and thin, and so I have a high center of gravity. In order to ride a bike with no hands, your center of gravity has to be low. It's got to be right on the root. So what happens is, when you get fearful or you tighten up, that center of gravity rises. And so, all right, I know that because I can't control the bike anymore. So I really develop like, okay, I'm going around a turn. Do I feel comfortable making this turn without putting my hands on the wheel or on the handlebar? And I can sense the energy rise up. And I'm like, okay, I have to relax it down, but I have to be aware of everything. And this is how you train the physical body to find like this balance, because at least for me, that's my training practice. And it is my favorite thing in the whole wide world to do.
Oh my
I get in
God.
the right headspace. I get like music, and it's just like, I wear a costume. I mean, it's not like
That's
a real
so
costume,
rad.
but I always wear the same hat, and I'm like, I always got like a black t-shirt. I got these black pants, and
Because that's part of the ritual that gets you ready for your.
part of the ritual.
Yeah.
There's certain music. So I'll tell you, this is crazy. Can I keep going with this story?
Please do.
All right. So this was May of this year. So I'm riding the bike, and I'm on this trail which runs along the river. It's probably the best thing about living where I do. I'm 100 feet from this paved trail which hugs the river and goes for maybe, I think, like 20 miles. So it's
Rad.
so much fun. It's like, it's bendy. It's got a little bit of hills. It's interesting and all this sort of stuff. So
Sounds great.
it's popular, and I take on all the risk because I'm the knucklehead without any hands on my handlebars. So I have to take on the responsibility, because there are a lot of people who are completely clueless of just their surroundings, and there are other people on bikes and all this sort of stuff, because all sorts of stuff can go wrong.
They just like
It's
mosey
part of the,
along. Yeah.
yeah, it's part of the training, in my opinion. So
True.
I'm riding, and I've gotten very good. Like a lot of cyclists, in my opinion, if you ride bikes, this is true. Like a lot of cyclists are assholes, and
True.
so like I take very, very. I'm very conscientious to be conscientious, because I'm like, there are walkers around here. There's all sorts of different things, and thank you and pat please and all that sort of stuff. Manners matter, particularly now more than ever.
Agreed.
So I'm riding my bike, and I've been here for 4 years. I've been doing this for 7 years. I've fallen off my bike once.
Wow.
And I fell off my bike from a teenage girl who was on a skateboard, and I was leaving a keto practice, or a keto practice. So that was easily 5 years ago. I'm riding my bike. I see these two teenagers on skateboards. They look like they could have come straight out of The Simpsons. Who's the guy with the long hair?
Oh yeah. I can't remember his name.
His name's going to come to me.
I feel like it starts with a B.
Jimmy.
Oh, okay.
Looks like Jimmy, like that type of kid. Like, he's 15 years old. It looks like he's a troublemaker. And the last thing I remember is I remember being aware that I was passing them, and I noticed that was around a turn, and there was a blind turn, which means I don't know if I'm passing on their left, there's going to be possibly another cyclist coming on there. And those are the things you have to be aware of when you're riding. And I remember saying, passing on your left. And then next thing you know, I'm incredibly disoriented, and I'm standing on the bike path. And I have my hands on my knees. And I look up, and I see this kid. I'm calling him Jimmy. And he's got like this shit-eating grin on his face. And he's like, sorry, man. I'm really sorry. And he's laughing. And he like takes off on a skateboard, and his buddy's like up ahead. And I'm thinking inside, I'm like, I just crashed into this kid. I'm thinking I was the one who was at fault, that I crashed into him, and I feel bad. I'm like, God, I hope I didn't hurt him. All these sort of things. That's what's going on in my head. That's what happens when you have Cancer rising. It's like the first thing you think.
Yeah.
If that was Aries rising, I would have gone after him right away.
Yeah.
So I'm like kind of walking around. I'm like really disoriented. Like I'm confused. And like I see my bike's to the side and I look at my arm and my arm's all bashed up.
Oh God.
And then I look at my knee. I'm like, my knee's fine. And I look at my hip. I'm like, yeah, my hip's fine. I'm like, my shoulder's fine. My head's fine. I'm like, if I fell off my bike, I just assumed I fell off my bike. I would have indications throughout my body.
True.
I just have trauma in 3 very specific spots. And then I remember, I'm like, I came to, I was standing up.
Yeah.
And then I was like, the kid was laughing. Like, I remember the feeling I had from him. I was like, there's something not right about the way he talked to me. And this is what makes the most logical sense to me. And this goes, and I'll tell you why I think it's interesting. But are you familiar with a popular subversive trend among the youth of today, which is known as the knockout game?
No.
All right. So
what? Not even a little.
So the knockout game, and this is like, it shows its head like every couple of years, but like about 3 years ago, I guess it maybe was getting a little bit more press. It was basically primarily teenage boys who try to sucker punch someone and knock them out with one punch, and like all their other friends are like, they're going to videotape it or they want to see it happening. Like it's not even so much.
Wow.
It's not even so much about like, I'm angry at this person. There's no anger involved in it. Like it's like the challenge aspect, and then like all sorts of other things.
Can I do it?
Can I do it? And like all that sort of stuff. I mean, there was a book written about in the early 1990s, or called Super Pet Predators, and was talking about like, we're building a generation where kids are going to be like this. But anyway, that exists. Doesn't exist happen, but I'll tell you this. I know about this because I've seen enough videos online to know that this happens.
Wow, I don't even know how I've never heard of this.
It's good. You don't want this in your consciousness.
No,
so
true.
That's what happened to me. When I passed these guys, what I had on my arm fit perfectly with the underside of a skateboard. They were truck marks. It was where the trucks hit my arm, and that's why it was so. So
they hit you with a skateboard to try to knock you out?
Yep.
What the fuck?
So I'm coming up behind him, and then like, imagine passing to the left and the guy just like pops it.
Wow.
So, but that's not the thing that's crazy. And this is the reason I'm telling you the story.
Okay.
The reason I'm telling you the story is, this is what my experience has shown, like, trying to find in the most physical way, walking on that balance point of like awareness of everything and awareness of nothing, and like whatever training is. So this is what happened. I'm riding my bike with no hands. Yeah. Like, that is a precarious thing to be in. Now, granted, I'm pretty good. This kid surprises me. My right arm, because I'm passing on his left, my right arm goes up to block it. My right arm does not collapse in, because I would have been hit in the head if I did. Somehow I block it, jump off the bike, and land on my feet.
Yeah. And the reason you have no memory really of it is because
I have no idea.
Close, I think.
If I were to guess, it's the same reason why people who are in car accidents don't remember the car accident. They remember, there's something about the human. I'm not suggesting that I'm like, Batman Begins or anything. I'm saying that was a touch of it. And I would say someone who truly lives that all the time, that they would have total recall of that situation. Right. For someone who, like me, who like touched it in an extreme circumstance, like, no, the whole thing blacked right out.
Wow. That is a trip.
But that's why I think we practice these sort of balances.
Well, I love that that's your practice. I love that story and that lesson that you get from that as well. Like, when you're in that state, you're gonna be more capable, I think, of responding to, especially an extreme situation, right?
Yes. And what's cool about it is, I'm going to be careful what I say. I'm not wishing this to happen again.
Right.
But what's interesting is, I know enough people who ride bikes, and I'm very aware of psychological residue of a bad bike accident. That's probably true with a lot of things. Like, whenever, particularly though, Like I know people have been hit by cars, or people who've anyone who's been attacked randomly. Something gets in the back of the head, right? That I don't feel safe in times where I feel safe.
Right.
Like that's what happened. And then it's hard to let go of for people. And so it has this psychological residue. When you rise to the occasion, the opposite happens. You're like, I don't know, I didn't do anything. I didn't plan for this. I didn't prepare it. I didn't see it. It wasn't like, I did anything conscious. Like it just happened. And then you're like, oh,
you're like, moving on.
I don't have to be concerned about that.
Yeah. That is pretty incredible. I really love too that like this practice that you have, because like you're saying, you meditate and then you have other practices as well, like this bike riding thing. And I was thinking recently about how you can get into a practice, especially if it's something that's almost like routine for you, and you start to not probably connect with it very much or have very much benefit from it because it becomes routine. And it's just like when you're driving to work every day, like after a while, you don't even think about where you are or where you're going. You just do it on autopilot. And then what's the point of a practice if you're autopiloting through it? So like, while it's good to have something that you're doing regularly to help train yourself or help be prepared or get as in touch with whatever it is you want to, you also don't want to just do it in a rote way.
Exactly.
So and I feel like that, I don't know. I bet someday you might like develop something else besides bike riding, maybe. Well, or who knows, or you'd add another thing. Or
what's interesting about I do add different things to it. There's more that goes on.
Like you're gonna
what's nice about bike riding is you go and you ride in a different location.
Yeah.
And that keeps it fresh. And what's beautiful about it is you can't, when you ride with no hands, you can't slip mentally. You can't be like, oh, as if like, you're sitting on a pillow because, oh yeah, I just fell down.
Yeah.
You don't want to fall off the bike, or I just crashed into him. So like, that's the kind of interesting. It's like friggin' Luke Skywalker doing the one-handed arm handstand, the one-armed handstand. You got to be completely focused on something like that.
That's true. Like you can fake meditate for sure. Like you can sit in a room, like have your music or whatever, and sit there and be thinking about like that ballet you want to go to next week or whatever. I don't know why that was my example. I've never gone to a ballet, but
I would imagine ballet is amazing. Like any of these, whenever I see a practice, which is like requires physical grace, balance, fluidity, strength, artistry, that's when you get the whole package. Aikido, I mentioned that earlier, like that's probably the closest martial art to it.
Is that the one where you use like people's sort of movements against them, almost like you don't exert as much or something?
Well, yes, there are many martial arts that use that principle. Aikido, though, is known as a strikeless martial art, but it is based upon that. I was intrigued by it more so for its like the energy aspects. Like if you go to the founder of Aikido, like if you want to look at it as like not being an ancient art which is reestablished, which some people might hold, but other than that, it was like more or less invented after World War II. And the guy who invented it, O Sensei, was this incredibly mystical guy. And everything he said, he's like, when you're practicing Aikido, you are literally a symbol of the universe, and it is your job to blend the energies. And that's what Aikido is. Like, and so like that was like, I was like, yeah, I'm doing that. Like that spoke my language. But then depending, Aikido's had a lot of different lineages, I guess you could say, and some are a little bit more mystical, and some are a little bit more like physical, and some are like a blend of the two. And so I think it depends. But I came into it like completely drawn to that physical thing. I mean, I've had a lot of interesting, strange experiences with my Aikido history. I have not practiced with a dojo for some time, but I think about my time with that. Like that's the only explanation I have for the bike riding incident is like, it got in my nervous system. And there's certain things which I gave to the community. I made three different pieces of art, which I donated to the dojo which I was involved with. I made this beautiful boken rack. And then my teacher's teacher, who in the world of Aikido, he's got a pretty good reputation. He didn't know who I was. And I was like just some junior guy. Like, there are people who've studied for 25 years. I've got like 2 years of experience. And I made this this wooden training sword, which within like these traditions, like the idea, like some guy who hasn't studied under a master and so forth would go and try to replicate, in some ways could be thought of as being very distasteful or disrespectful. But I was like, but I'm going to make up my own rules. And because I'm making up my own rules, that doesn't. So I built that as an idea, and I built it upon the phi ratio and all this other stuff. And I made it something else. And so because of that, you know, it's nothing to compare it to. And so I made that for my teacher's teacher. So in my mind, when I used to go into you know, I say quote unquote, the fantasy, I would always imagine that whatever this tradition is, has been a part of this lineage where, you know, human beings have been able to do these things for so long. This is me showing my respect in the truest, most authentic way. And this is what I can make. You know, all I can do is say, like, I put everything I have into this. And I've had some experiences, like the bike experience, like I told you. I've had quite a few of them, which can only be explained, or at least I only explain it, is like, you know, I bribed them.
Well, you're being like in line with that energy, you know, enough to benefit from it or flow with it or whatever. But I think you're like, you making that sword is whatever you're calling it. I forget the word for it.
Boken.
You're not doing that as a way to like puff up your ego and be like, look what I can do. I'm so cool. I understand all these things. And like, you're doing it as a way of like honoring this tradition and this energy. So hopefully that's what people would see in it.
Well, I think my approach and was probably a little bit more so, I wanted to have a deep connection with, so I see a lot of things. If I'm going to be in my mind's eye, in my own internal sort of thinking, I'll ultimately go and see something as a form or as an archetype. I bring things back to that, which is why astrology speaks to me. And so I recognized Aikido as a physical representation of a certain type of form, everything which it represents. It was fluid, it was graceful, it was beautiful, it was balanced, it was effective, all these different sort of things. I was like, I want to go, and I would like to have more of this in my life than less of this in my life. And I was not in the place to, how you would normally go and establish that is through like hard work. You go to the dojo, you go and you work, and you commit your time and your attention to your practice. And I did that to the best I could. But I was like, but there's something else I could do. It's like, I make things, I create things. And I will create to the truest ability which I can create to. And
I love that.
And that was it. So, and what I said, and what I'm thinking to myself is, if I give this, it will be reciprocated back to me. That's the law of, you know, the law of nature. In fact, it's probably even more so. Like, it's usually said, like, something which is greater, that transcends, like, you know, me thinking of myself as Mike, you know, what something one layer bigger than me is going to go and give you twice as much as you give. Like, you know, they say, for every step you take towards God, he takes 2 steps towards you. Whatever God may be, or like whatever this higher power is, there seems to be this relationship that the more genuine you are towards whatever it may be, which is beyond ourselves, it wants us to show a genuine appreciation, a genuine desire to want to connect with it.
I think that's the key too, that it gives me the most hope, actually, because I think that level of being genuine can't be obviously can't be faked. And I think there's a lot of people who try to use sort of natural law or universal law or magic or however you want to think of it to their advantage in a very destructive way. And I don't think that can be very genuine at some level. And so I think it can be very powerful, but I don't think it can ever like supersede, uh, you know, like a more genuine sort of like from the heart. I don't know. That's my idea of it. So it gives me a lot of hope. I think that that is true.
Well, I think that's the balance. I mean, there's there's like both the desire, like not everyone wants the power, right? Like I'll use a sports analogy. Like if you're playing basketball and it's down to the last second and there's one shot, typically there's only one person on the team who wants to take that shot. Like that's a quality. That's a quality that is not universal. That ability to say like, I got it. And I'm prepared if I miss the shot, and I'm prepared to make the shot, but I want it. So that's like, you know, the people who want the power, like that's the power, like, you know, that's not universal. And then there's the other person who's going to like, I'm the one who will set the pick, or I'm the one who will make the pass, or I'm the one who will sacrifice in order for the other.
Yeah.
And I think when we're talking about these, you know, these concepts of which I really think is about being alive today, is finding that balance between the power and the grace, you know, between Venus and Saturn, if you will, or Venus and Pluto. Like these are very, very, I mean, that's what Tai Chi is. That's, you know, Tai Chi is that balance between the yin and the yang, or the iron fist with the silk glove. Or I think that's the true definition of Rosicruce, or the rose cross. Rose represents Venus and cross represents Saturn in their highest expressions. And it's like the wisdom and strength and discipline of Saturn covered and coupled and linked in with the elegance and harmony and beauty of Venus. And it's that blend, like, you know, that's what we strive for. And that's a quality which can be applied to every single circumstance, from like the highest and most lofty to like, you know, how you interact with your mailman.
Yeah. Or how you cut a lemon.
How you cut a lemon.
It's so true.
I think that's the coolest thing about, which I learned about Japanese culture in studying Aikido, was that approach. Like every single thing, if I'm going to cut a lemon or pour tea or practice this art, there's like, I bring this power and grace and elegance to it.
What a beautiful thing. I love that idea. I've never definitely heard of the Rosicrucians presented in that way, but it also makes me think of, there's this, I think it's a long-standing debate, but I'm just sort of starting to think about it more deeply, about what Lucifer is, or what Lucifer represents. And I brought it up in the Facebook group recently too. And I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable with it. And I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings, and I'm not trying to claim that I know anything. I'm literally just asking and wondering. And I know that Lucifer is associated with Venus. I know that Venus is associated with love. And so I'm confused. And there's all these different confusing aspects of the idea of Lucifer that I'm just, what is your take on all of it?
So great question. This is, I'll just say the best of my understanding. So Lucifer and Satan were linked together as concepts from, I'm going to say, John Milton's Paradise Lost.
Okay.
I'm not certain how old that is. But before that, Lucifer has, exactly, it's always been associated with Venus. It's been associated with the, it's the light bringer, and it's Prometheus. So this is what I think is the biggest kind of like mind fuck about Judeo-Christianism, is this idea of like snake and serpent and Lucifer and light bringer, and are they the good guy or the bad guy?
Yeah.
Good guy or bad guy? It's like, be wise like serpents. Like that is, I like to get a lot of my information from fundamental Christian sites. I love their research. I love their hearts. an authentic Christian, from my personal experience, have been the most beautiful, strongest, caring human beings I've ever met.
True.
I that's not my practice, but I recognize that, and I strive to be more like that. But that
Seriously.
being said, they'll say that phrase, "Be wise like serpents." I'm like, but the serpent's the bad guy, right?
Right. That's what you say.
And I'm not trying to bust balls. I'm just trying to be like, there are inherent wordplay paradoxes with, is Prometheus good or is Prometheus bad? Is the light break, is Lucifer
Yeah.
good? Is it, Mother Mary or Mary Magdalene? All of these sort of, is it Barack Hussein Obama, or is it Obama Hussein, or Osama bin Laden
Yeah.
and Saddam Hussein and Barack Hussein Obama?
Yeah, seriously.
It's like all of these different, like, phonetic conceptual matches, which are put in the back of the mind. I mean, this is part of, like, the mental magic, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's the only way you find truth in that is the balance, like one level above it. Like, it depends what they're bringing to it and what
So,
you're looking for, because the story is contradictory.
yeah.
The story is contradictory.
You can't find like absolute knowledge there. But I
Right.
feel like, so there's this interesting thing too, where Jesus is also sometimes associated with the morning star and
Yeah.
the light bringer. And so I'm like, well, is Jesus, I mean, that's the same archetype in some way. So that's strange. But I look at, there's this Gnostic teaching I came across lately that says that Lucifer is more like an archetypal energy, and its role is to always bring to you and put in front of you the thing that's going to challenge you to grow the most. So it might seem like this negative thing, but like when you think about it, if you're meditating, that's your practice, and you're doing it in a silent room, like you don't want to keep doing that forever. At some point, you want to introduce some sort of noise or whatever, or you want to do it in a room that's not black, or you want to go do it on a busy street eventually, and like see that you can still get into that same state. And so that is sort of the same concept, is that there's this like teaching force that's like, okay, well now I'm going to do this, and how are you going to react to that? And that's actually good for you to get over that. So, but you could also look at it and be like, fuck you, why are you putting roadblocks in my way? I don't know.
So a couple of things. You just brought up so many interesting things. So I don't even remember where we began with the Lucifer, so I'm going to go straight to the adversary. So okay. Satan means adversary,
right?
And that
but
is
Satan and Lucifer aren't even the same.
But they're not the same. But
okay.
there we just linked it. And so you can look at, it is said, like, Saturn and Satan, they're from the same archetype. And the Saturn astrological connotation is discipline, limitation. It's the adversary. It is said from a biblical perspective that Satan rules this world. It's said from a astrological perspective, Saturn rules this world, because it's all the material world which we're living in. And it's all about, these are the limitations you're going to have. And then what is the discipline which you must bring in order to face the limitation or the roadblock or what have you. This was the other thing. So Mormonism. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm going to say this with probably a high degree that I'm accurate about this, but I'm pretty certain that within Mormonism, the story is that Jesus and Lucifer are brothers.
Wow.
And then again, we see that. So there's certain elements where we can see in these stories over and over again. And then what was the last thing you said, which was so interesting I wanted to respond to?
The idea that they're bringing the exact sort of roadblock you need in order to grow.
Okay, so I want to talk about roadblock, because part of what I think happens now, again, I don't know if this is done. I don't know who the designer is, and I don't know if this is just, all I'm saying is we know it's in existence, and this is what happens. So when you hold contradictory thoughts in your consciousness, whether you're aware of it, so really in your subconscious, you're holding these, you have like this cognitive dissonance, you're holding two paradoxical ideas. And what that does is that stops you from moving forward.
Yeah.
That's the definition. So when you talk about roadblocks, you're absolutely right. They're roadblocks. There's stuff to stop you from moving forward. Then that's all of these contradictory things, because because ultimately what you want is truth. And what truth means is there's no contradictions. That's why truth and logic, logos, that's why they're the same. Like there should not be, you're using logic to go through and remove all the contradictions. And you see all these contradictions in these stories and you're like, okay, by holding contradictions, it stops us from progressing, because even though we think we're progressing, we're still holding on things that are contradicted. So I want to go and take this one step deeper. I was thinking about this before we talked today. So when do you think stop signs became commonplace?
I don't know. We only got a stoplight in my hometown in like 1998. So 1900, I don't know.
So would you think that there'd be stop signs before there were cars?
No.
No. Okay, so we can kind of say like stop signs. I don't know if there were horse stop signs. I don't know. I wasn't alive.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, I don't know.
Disney hasn't made a movie to tell me yet.
True.
The
internet.
I'm assuming there wasn't. So think about this as an idea. So prior to the advent of stop signs, and I'm not saying there's a stop sign conspiracy. I mean, maybe I am, but I'm saying but factually, there was never a stop sign. So now let's assume that you're not living in a one stop sign town. What would you say, like how many stop signs you see in a given day? Like like in your peripheral vision.
Yeah.
Like let's say 10, right?
Yeah, probably more, but yes.
So 10 impressions a day. So let's say that's 4,000 impressions a year. And so then like in a decade, that's 40,000 impressions. And so you can see prior to the stop sign, there was never a constant subliminal message which was telling you to stop. In the shape of an octagon, like it's consistent.
Yeah.
And they're usually red. They're not red in all places. But all of these things, red has a certain connotation which speaks to the deepest part of the mind. I'm going to suggest the octagon does as well. Probably. And so we're seeing stop, stop, stop. Red, we're talking about really just basic urges, which is interesting.
And it's the first color that babies see. Red, black, and white.
So there is a stop. There is a stop agenda.
Yeah.
That's funny to say. Like just like stop signs and just like contradictions and all these stories, which somehow we were talking about this earlier about, limitations of just being alive, being in body. And it's like, that's one of the limitations that we don't even think about, which is we're so inundated with stop.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just like randomly reminded me that one of the first times I was ever meditating pretty deeply, before I even knew that that's really what I was doing. And I was, I wouldn't know this in the moment, but I was like about to become sort of lucid or leave my body or have an out of body experience or however you want to describe that. Mm-hmm. And I heard audibly someone yell, "Stop!" and it like stopped me, and I stopped. And I just like, you just reminded me of that.
Was that internal or was that like someone outside?
It was internal. Yeah, no, it was like in my head, or almost like you would in a dream, but I wasn't dreaming, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So then I'm like, well, what was trying to stop me? Or I don't know. So then I started this whole thing in my head of like, should I stop? Should I not be doing that? Is there something dangerous in it? Like, do I really want to do this? But sometimes I think you have to go kind of into that side of things where you like test the waters, or you kind of go into like the darkness, or you like go into the fear or whatever, so that for sure that that's not true. Like you were saying, you have to get rid of all the things that are like not true or that are contradictions. And how would you know if you didn't go through it first?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something good about it. I don't know.
Well, I try not to think about like I think about like, for me, like, could this serve, and what circumstances would this serve? And then, does it hurt someone? Am I taking from someone else?
Yeah.
The whole natural law sort of thing, in doing so. And we talked about this earlier. So Sagittarius is notorious, and I do this all the time. Like what I just told you, I had to learn to think that way, because that was not my natural way of thinking. I was like, oh, everyone loves experiences. Everyone likes to push the envelope. And then I came to realize, like, no, a lot of people find it very uncomfortable.
True.
I like that. So So yeah, I used to probably like when all of this stuff, this is like 10 years ago, like whatever we were doing 10 years ago is prepared us for like this cutting edge. I mean, that's always true, I suppose, but it's just getting so wild. But 10 years ago for me, a lot of things seem to have been happening in my life. And
Yeah.
one of them was like very consciously playing with, what is real in my mind? What can I do? And leaving body and remote viewing and then realizing, what am I comfortable with, what I'm not comfortable with. And I had some really strange experiences with that.
Do you want to tell us any?
And probably the weirdest, this is probably the last time I did it. So I'm skeptical of everything, but I'll go and I'll try it. There's a Sag way.
Yeah.
There's Saturn and Gemini. I'm skeptical of everything, and then I've got like this all this Sag. I'm like, but we're gonna do it.
Yeah. Check it out.
So I was reading, like, this is like 10 years ago, this how-to manual as it related to astral projection. And I started reading all about like how to do it before I started reading like, this is why you might want to second guess doing it.
Yeah.
But I'm just like, jump right in.
Yeah.
So I'm reading it and I'm doing like the exercises on a regular basis. And I was lying in my bed, and with what I would call my imagination, I went into a friend of mine's house. I was like, okay, I know what their house looks like, and I'm going to go in from like room to room and walk around. Like, I'm doing that in my mind. And I was like, whatever. Like, I'm not like, I don't feel like I'm part of like the any of these US military programs where I could see something. But like, it's all in my mind. It's all in my mind. Next day I see my friend, and he tells me his child had a nightmare with me in their room.
Whoa.
And I was like, all right,
that synchronicity.
I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's like, was I there and like this kid saw me, or whether that's, synchronistic or where they're coincidental. But I was like, you know what? I don't need to do this. I don't want people doing this to me. So I'm not going to do this to other people.
You don't want to scare children.
You don't want to scare children. You're right. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's not cool.
Well, right. I feel like if you had like a purpose that you were trying to accomplish, there could be something useful about it. It could be a tool. But if you're just going to go floating around into people's houses, who knows what
exactly.
you're doing.
That's part of the Sagittarius world of lessons, is boundaries. Like, no, you don't go in other people's houses.
Like, oh, you don't like that? Okay, I'm sorry.
Exactly. I'm like, I thought you had thought it was cool that I was scaring your kid.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, I don't think it was anything. I just thought I was just creating a scenario in my imagination.
Right. Well, it was actually Alan Sisko was telling me that a lot of people have a hard time visualizing. And I was like, oh, I don't. Is that a thing? Like, people can't visualize? And then I kind of was like, how do you not visualize? Isn't that what your imagination is you visualizing things? Or is that?
Well, this is my take. I think most people have the wrong expectation of what visualization is.
Okay.
I mean, certainly. So, can you hold a shape in your mind's eye right now, like a square?
Yeah.
Can you hold a cube?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you put like a cube within a cube?
Yes.
Okay. So you've got like pretty good flexibility with your imagination, or like being able to hold shapes. It took me a while to be able to hold shapes, like 3-dimensional shapes. So like there's I think a skill set which can be delved into. But then how I do it, I think, is unique to me, just like how you do it is unique to you. So there's a little bit of both, maybe. Holding 3D shapes, I think, is really significant.
Wow.
Because it requires a degree of visualization. Like, it's hard enough to think of like a circle. And now let me give depth to it and turn to a sphere.
See, I visualize everything that everyone's saying all the time. Like, when you were describing going into your friend's house, I was picturing you imagining yourself going into your friend's house.
Everyone does.
Okay.
That's the thing. Like everyone does it. They may not realize they're doing that. I mean, this is the whole thing. Like Walt Disney, let me capture the imagination. Walter Lippmann, like they're like two founders of what we think of as propaganda. Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann.
I've never
And
heard of Lippmann.
Lippmann is famous for saying, let me see if I remember this correctly. We I want to control the images people paint in their minds or something along that, like basically saying like,
God.
I want to be the guy who gives you, like when you think of a car, you think of my car, or like, you know, the way I've envisioned cars to look like. When you think of beauty, or when you think of safety, or when you think of concepts, I'm going to be the one who's created how you envision it.
What a psycho. Like, who wants that power? I don't even
People
get
who want to
that.
control power. Yeah, I
Wow.
tend to agree with you. It's very un-Sagittarius is to want that power.
Okay.
It's like, because they're like, oh, that's too much responsibility.
Yeah, I don't want that. But
You know,
also,
that
like,
your Leo wants it. Your
yeah.
Taurus wants it.
So that, I mean, that power that people have to imagine, is that why I'm having a hard time imagining that people can't visualize? Is that, I mean, are they visualizing just things that were like pre-programmed for them? Like they watch too much TV or something, or
Well,
or
this
is it
is my,
actually just, I don't know.
I think some people may have the false expectation that when they shut their eyes and they turn on their imagination, it should be as much resolution and clarity as looking at a TV screen.
That's what I was wondering, because I'm like, I visualize stuff, but it's not like
It's
it's not like
different.
it's physically, yeah, it's
It's
different.
different. It's, for me, I feel it a little bit more than I see it, but I'm
Yeah.
seeing it, but I feel it. I feel it as a shape almost. But
Yeah.
and that's what I mean. Like most people don't know what to look for. Their expectation is like, oh, I should be able to see dancing colors and this. I'm like, well, maybe eventually, but whatever it is you're doing, the the clairs, do you know what I mean by the clairs? Clair audio,
Oh,
clairvoyant,
right.
clair.
Yeah.
And these are all French terms, or originally French terms, because, you know, this was part of that language. We don't really have terms for those. But it's talking about the higher senses, as like very real and skills, if you will, that can be further developed. And they're a little bit trickier because they're not tangible. It's not like I can watch you run and then give you techniques on form and stuff like that, because you don't know what's going on in their head. But
True.
if you are at the point, I think, that you are interested in these topics, you've developed enough consciousness and you have enough awareness of the inner world that, you know, look at it the other way. How am I imagining? What am I doing? And trust that and build whatever those things are.
That's a good point.
It's always in your own backyard. It's always easier.
I feel like any of those things, like you're saying, like are something, they're all skills that people could develop if they want. Like when people say, I always get blown away too when people say they don't dream. Because I'm like, you do dream. You just don't remember it, or you're not consciously aware of it, but you could develop that skill. Like it is a skill also. And same
Yes, it
with
is.
visualizing, and same with probably anyone could become clairaudient. I think that that is true. I have no real evidence to base that on. I just feel like humans are humans, and we all, maybe unless there's something that is like damaged, or, you know, there's obviously people can have like disabilities, so maybe not literally everyone, but in general I think people can do these things.
Certainly. I mean, I would imagine it has to do, it would be parallel to like the physical world. Like
Yeah.
technically everyone can walk, and some people walk like a little bit better than others. You see someone
Yeah.
walk, you're like, wow, that's a hell of a gait. I like, they carry themselves with balance. And like some people, they wouldn't even have any idea, like, oh, you mean there's a way to walk other than the way I'm just doing it unconsciously.
True.
And things can be developed, and you could practice your walking and running, but some people just aren't going to become world-class athletes.
Yes, some people are going to be better than others.
And there's certain areas. So yeah, so it's like all of these sort of things. I've thought a lot about clairaudient. I'm like, do you hear? What confuses me about that? That's not one of my realms, if you will.
Yeah.
Does someone who has those experiences, are they hearing their voice? Like, does it sound different in their head from their own thoughts?
So my, like that voice I heard when I was about to leave my body or whatever was not my voice. And I've
Okay.
heard, I'm not crazy, but I've heard other voices at
Right.
various times for
Right.
various
Right.
reasons,
Right.
mostly in liminal states or whatever, and they're not ever in my voice.
Okay.
So that,
Okay.
but I don't know what a clairaudient would say, but I imagine it'd be similar,
I
just
would
based
think
on
so
that,
too.
those few experiences.
I've never heard a voice other than my own voice in my head.
See, that's interesting because many times when I'm falling asleep and going from this state of consciousness to that state of consciousness in that liminal state, I hear a lot of things. But it's like really brief, you know? And if I have to if I could get into that state and stay in that state, I'm sure I could hear even more clearly what is actually going on. But there's a lot of noise and chatter. I've just always kind of assumed it's like radio signals or something, like, you know, that and I've always assumed that that's another thing that anybody could do.
Okay, I'm gonna take that back. I would say once about a month ago, I heard, and I was like, the only thing that makes sense is I just picked up a radio signal.
Yeah. I think there has to be something like that. There's some state of
it happened for just like what you're talking about. Yeah. So I don't know.
So another time I have this is what made me develop this theory of like a rogue wave of audio. So like if I was in like a kind of crowded place with a lot of like echoes and just ambient sound or whatever, and I very clearly heard my close friend's voice say, "Hey, Lindsay," and I like turned around and I was like, couldn't see her, and I was like, "Where is she?" And everyone's like, "Who?" And I'm like, "Where's Laura?" And they're like, "Laura's not here." And I'm like, "I just heard her say my name. She's somewhere right here," and she wasn't there. But I think like just like you can in the ocean, you have all these waves and they're all like interacting, and all of a sudden they like had the perfect storm of wave power and they just like shoot up something. I think my brain like caught this random set of waves that sounded like almost exactly like that or something. And it just almost like pareidolia, where you like make a face where there isn't one. I feel like it was something like that because it was so convincing. I was like, I just heard her voice.
You make a face where there isn't one? I don't know what that means.
Pareidolia. So like people think like the face on Mars is not actually a face on Mars, but our brain is programmed to see faces. And so we see a face there.
Right.
So they have a word for it, and it's called pareidolia.
That's a good word. That's interesting.
I think that's what it's called. I think that's what that
whole idea, I think is interesting. They talk a lot about, people are seeing connections which aren't there, and I suppose there's a truth to that. But it's kind of said in a disparaging way, like, the human mind is designed to see patterns, but they're seeing these patterns that aren't there. If the human mind is meant to see patterns, what are we supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
If we're meant to see these faces and things, well, what are we supposed to do? It's the same idea with like placebo. It's like, well, the problem is this was a sugar pill and you thought that it was healing you. You fool, let me give you this made straight. You know what I mean? So
you're like, but it healed me. So
right, exactly. So it's flipped. That would be that's an interesting idea. You were just mentioning something right before that. What were you mentioning? It was I want to respond to it.
I was talking about hearing the things in that liminal state, and I was talking about the rogue wave theory of sound.
Oh, this is what. So I think about this. I like how we're having this conversation, because I always try to the best of my ability, think of a material, concrete example of something which seems to be immaterial. So one of the things I like to go back to a lot is, and it's what you're talking about, is the idea of how resonance works within a piano. Ooh. So if you have a tuned piano and you hit middle C and you're looking at the wires, all the other wires that are C in the different octaves are going to vibrate ever so gently.
Wow.
So why does that happen is the question. It's actually happening in the physical universe. Like, I don't know if that's happening because one is the tightness of the other wires is in such a way that when the frequency of that middle C, this is what being in tune means, it hits it and it starts to vibrate. So if the tension was a little bit different, it wouldn't vibrate. That's why the other ones don't. So when you think about that, we're seeing how frequency is transferring between different states,
Yeah.
and they have different qualities which make it connected. Like the string, the quality that puts it into the frequency of the vibrating chord has to do with its tautness.
Yeah.
So it has to be true everywhere, that like when you're talking about, when I pick something up, you're picking something up because maybe something's being sent out from, that's the string which has been struck. But then within you is creating the right tautness, whatever that may be, like, but a different quality in order to pick it up.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That also makes me think of like there's no reason why, sorry if this makes anyone uncomfortable, but women who spend time together will like sync up their cycles.
Of course.
Nobody knows why. There's no reason. You wouldn't even think it'd be a good thing to do, right? For our bodies to do, but they do it. And then also people who are singing in a group, their heartbeats will synchronize. And it
Exactly.
doesn't, even if their breathing is different, like some of them might have circular breathing and some of them might not. And some of them might take short breaths every once in a while, and some of them might take just a deep breath. And so they have totally different breathing rates, but their hearts all synchronize because they're singing together.
Yeah, this is like going back to the earlier part of our conversation, that's part of the laws of this matrix which we live in. And I think they all kind of give clues. I mean, you talked about like the menstruating ladies, and you said, maybe that's not a good thing. I look at reality as the truth. I'm like, well, if that's what happens, well then if we don't see that as a good thing, there's something wrong with our understanding. I mean, you can think, and so what are the circumstances? I think about that all the time as it relates to human beings, particularly human beings being as they are. It's like, what is the scenario where being as you are makes sense as opposed to not make sense?
Good point.
And those are the ways, like when we navigate through these things, that's the truth. When would this make sense? When would we want that?
Yeah.
Whatever that may be.
I like that too, because I like to think like the more absolutely you are, the better off the whole world is. The more true to yourself and the more like real that you are. Like
Exactly.
you don't want to be something that you're not, right? Like I think that's part of this transhumanist movement that makes me really uncomfortable, is that like people are so obsessed with being something that we're not, and they think it's better and they want it, and they're like, oh, I'm going to be more than human. It's like, maybe you should try being ultra human first. Like, maybe you should be as much yourself as you can, and then if you still really need something else, you can go find it. But I doubt that you'll find that you need anything else once you're there. But I don't think that people are there.
So, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But I do want to bring up, do you remember when it was all the rage? I guess it was in August when Elon Musk was on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't watch it, but I heard enough people talk about it that I saw. I'm like, okay, well, let me go watch like the highlight reel, whatever. And there was a talk, or there was a point that was made. It was like which Musk was, his basic perspective, if I could paraphrase it accurately, is like, AI and all this stuff, it's bad, but it's not going to stop it. And the sooner we interact with it, well, then the healthier the relationship can be.
Yeah.
And then he says it's going to go and increase, if you go and you take the neural link, ultimately, of course it's going to go increase your earnings potential. And that was just kind of like slid in there, because everything else, and I don't remember the other words, but I remember my feeling inside, because I've never actually heard Elon Musk speak before. Like, I'm very familiar with him, and maybe I've seen like short clips of him, and I've read about him. I've never seen him in that sort of thing. And he's talking. I'm digging with what this guy's saying. I'm like, okay, I can buy this. And there were other things. There's something else he was saying, which I was like, kind of like, I'm like, okay, I can see what he's saying. And then there was that, and it's going to increase your dollar earning. And all of this stuff, like when we talk about the the transhumanism is there. You can hear the story, and I can hear the story. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I'm like, yeah. But then it's always like you'll hear this one contradiction, which is based upon something which is a falsity. Like, you know, why would you completely alter the Homo sapien, which really, you know, in another topic, it doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, but based upon a fallacy like earning debt-based currency.
Yeah.
Or whatever, like, you know, even if it's cryptocurrency, it's still ridiculous. And so the stuff I want to go and improve myself so I can get better. You're right. It's based upon these sales jobs of how it can serve in a society or in a culture or in an environment which is, you know, pretty crappy. You know,
and I hate it is crappy. It's like dead and dying and full of destruction and non-life affirming things. And then I just wonder too, like why people think that it's unstoppable. They're like, oh, well, we're going to have it no matter what. AI is going to happen no matter what. And you're going to have Neuralink no matter what. And we're going to have transhumanism no matter what. And it's like, we don't have to do anything. We can do whatever we want. You know, but it's being presented, and I think it always has been presented in the mass mind as unstoppable. It's just a weird, and people just, it's unstoppable. Like they just go along with that.
I'll be a devil's advocate on this one. I mean, I agree with you fundamentally, like in terms of, I was talking to my father. My father's, I don't know, he's near 80, and he's my dad. Yeah. And so I was telling him, I was like, I bet you in 5 years, it'll be illegal to drive a car. And no one's going to want it. It's like they won't make cars with steering wheels. It's just like it will be as passe as horseback riding. You drive with a steering wheel because it's going to be a pastime you enjoy to do, a pursuit of yours.
In very specific places, with very
specific
rules.
Places, and usually like just limited to people of a certain level of means. And my father is like, that's the most ridiculous thing in the world. I would never go and do this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, dude, this has nothing to do with you. What makes you think this has to do with you? Like the people, I'm like, the people, we're talking 2 generations ahead. Like, who cares? And you can, if the smart way of how it's being done is you can go and live your life using a VCR if you wanted to. It's the next generation. And if I were 12 years old right now and I had the choice between like getting in a car and watching my videos, which are going to be beamed into my brain, or like on my, let's just assume still being on like an external device, or driving a car and dealing with all of the hassles that come with like knowing where I'm going to go and like how am I going to stop this and like all this stuff. No, they're not going to want it.
That's true.
Like, so I would say like this, unless the technology doesn't work, or unless like, you know, there's a major change to the environment, you know, this is coming. But what we can do is decide how we're going to participate now.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we can approach it. Like, I remember before they changed the Facebook algorithms. Like, so this is maybe in July. I was late to the game on Facebook. I purposely did not want to be on Facebook for a couple reasons.
God bless you.
But I had to. I got on like maybe like 2 years ago, I suppose, and it was really uncomfortable for me. Like I had to have someone else like do it for me. I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to like put my picture or whatever. But I can recall that I used to always see these like feel good videos about like 20 somethings or 40 somethings or 30 somethings who are not caught up with like, I'm fighting the system. Like all of their energy would be like, oh, I just created this way, which goes and it turns these plastic bottles into, it breaks it down on the molecular level and it completely matches silicon. And we're using it to refill in beaches. And, you know, whether or not Whether or not it's environmentally effective or not, I don't
Yeah.
know. But the idea was I was being constantly flooded with all of these different people coming at very innovative ways of conquering some of, at least what I would think would be like real environmental issues, because a lot of the environmental issues have been tweaked in terms of how they're presented. You know, to me, that's like part of one of the things, like, okay, well, I am alive now, and this is the time which I'm alive, and this is the environment, and this is what is at my fingertips, and what I can do and what I can't do, and then making decisions based from that perspective.
Yeah. I think, and one of the things that we kind of cycle back to in this very discussion over and over again is one of the things you can do is control your own mind and imagination and will and body.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
I think they're vitally more important than people realize. Like, I think we have a lot more power than we think we do. And I think that that's intentional. And I think like reclaiming that is just like key.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I am in particular agreement as it deals with the heart.
Yeah.
It's the most tangible, it's the most intangible, it's the most tangible frequency we have in our body. Like, you know, we know about brain waves, we know about sleep cycles, and we know about like all sorts of other cycles, but you can literally feel your heartbeat.
True.
And you can feel that it's different. Like, there's no denying, like, you know, I don't know what the inside of my head is. I've got a picture in my mind. I have a picture in my inner mind of what I believe a brain looks like. But that was given to me, I don't know, from personal experience. But
True.
I do have personal experience of, I know that emitting from the center of my physical body is this boom, boom.
True.
And I think that that is a very, very, that there's something very, very significant about that, and about what it means to be on this, you know, we call it a planet or what have you. We're at a point right now, you know, whether it's political correctness or contradictory theories, that everything has to be couched a little bit smartly. Like, you know, I don't want to say planet Earth because it's like, you know, well, maybe it's not a planet, maybe it's flat, maybe it's just people. Like, I don't know. That's a rabbit hole I choose not to go down. I agree that it's a significant one, but that's just not mine. And there's some interesting things on both sides, and I don't have an opinion or a conclusion, but
man, every time I think about it, I'm like, I don't know. I can't figure it out.
I can't explain the why you can see Chicago skyline across Lake Michigan. I don't know.
Right.
You make a valid point. You shouldn't be able to see it.
Totally.
This is what, you know, I don't know anything about this environment. I mean, except for a few things.
Right. It's true. Well, I love that about the heart too, because I think people are so disconnected in general that they don't even remember that. Like, I mean, you can think just on a very basic level, the most emotional moments you've had in your life, like, where do you physically feel that emotion? Like, you feel it literally there. You know, you can feel it. So that's like a superpower that you have, to be able to sense what's true and not true just from this place in your body. Right. That's a really easy, simple connection that you have that you can develop. Just for one example, when people say like, follow your heart, like, I think you can literally do that. And I think it's probably a better guide than any of the other systems you have in your body. Maybe when they're all in alignment, it would be
when they're in alignment, because we have, society has blended emotionality with heart. So a lot of people think like, my emotions are my heart.
Right.
And there's an overlap. There's certainly an overlap, but they're not. Like, you know, most people are really fucked up emotionally. Your heart is never wrong, but you're fucked up emotionally. And so it's when you encourage, go with your heart to someone who has not done the discipline. I'll give you one other example of where this is true. When you tell someone to go with their heart who does not have that emotional strength and maturity, and I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say 99.999% of us do not have that, you know, myself included.
So right.
You know, it's not like, you know, I got to figure it out and everyone else does. Like, no, we grew up in an environment which destroyed that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're learning it. So if you're told to go by your heart and you are unable to really recognize like what's emotionality, what's unhealthy, what's like, all of these things. Astrology is really cool about this. Being connected to the moon is really interesting about this. But that distinction needs to be separated. Otherwise, you're just going to be going like really based upon, crappy guidance. It's
Right.
the
Like,
same thing. It's the same thing with like intuition. Is in a lot of ways is the same thing. Go with your intuition, but if you have not learned how to separate what intuition feels like from what are my pre-programmed fears or predispositions based upon like my family or my astrology or whatever,
my
it's like,
biases.
right, like if you don't recognize that they feel very similar and there's a
That's
subtlety,
true.
well, you're probably going to go with the wrong advice.
Wow, that is so key. You are absolutely right. That's a really good set of warnings too.
And the
I
only
feel
way,
like,
go on.
well, I feel like I've because I look back at like the emotional and spiritual and mental work that I've done in my life, and I still have trouble with those exact things you just described. So I think you're right that it's probably a pretty small amount of the population that even could try to use those tools accurately.
Well,
But I
it's
mean, you have to start somewhere, right?
you
Like
have
you
to,
can't.
right,
Yeah,
exactly. You have to start. I'm saying it's like the law of attraction. Like in a lot of ways, like the law of attraction is ridiculous. Otherwise, everyone will be driving around in pink Cadillacs.
true.
Like if the amount of copies of The Secret that were sold should there should be a correlation between like
Tons
islands
of
with houses
millionaires.
on, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but there's a truth to it. There's a truth to it, and it's like uh I know a lot of people who are spiritually, psychologically smart, and like what they say is absolutely true about like being in it's I'm holding a certain frequency or a certain perspective or a certain outlook and stuff like that. And like when you're in alignment with something, you're going to go and pull that in. And I know that's true in a physical level because of that middle C piano experiment, because that is true. That's a truth which I've seen with my physical eyes or material reality, and I know that's true. But I
Yeah.
also know if that chord is not right, the other C, it's not going to vibrate.
True.
And the bottom line is, it's like most of us carry. I think it's impossible. It's impossible to have been born post 1945 without, even if you had the most stable, loving household and everything was friggin' awesome, our world is not. And
Yeah.
you can't not have that residual on you. And if you have not gone and looked and recognized and gone through your own sort of inventory and just done the best you can in terms of recognizing particularly this emotional sort of immaturity which everyone holds, you're never going to be in alignment. You're always going to be slightly out of tune because there's stuff on you.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a paradox with that, because what I'm saying is like, yeah, everyone's fucked emotionally.
Yeah.
And inherently there are people who are not. But the only reason they're not is because they went through all of the work to figure out
Yeah.
how to clear themselves out. And they'll be the first ones to be like, yeah, everyone in the world
Yeah.
is,
True.
because they've gone and they've done that within their own lives.
Well, and I
Uh,
think that that's part of that law of attraction, though, is like no matter where you're at, you're attracting the experience you need in order
yeah.
to go through to get like whatever. So like you're vibrating at that resonance. It might not be the one that you wish you were vibrating at, but whatever you are vibrating at, you're attracting that, and it's going to help you get past it, basically, if you use it in that way. Does that make
I would
sense?
change the word from like need to is.
Okay.
You're vibrating with what you are,
Yeah.
you're getting what you are. You're not like,
True. Yeah.
I don't think it's like there's a taskmaster's like he's saying this is what you need.
True.
I just think like it's built into the laws of how this system seems to work.
Right.
And it's complex, because our needs and our wants are confusing, and
I
you
think in
know,
a way it's like it's more honest than you are. You're like,
it's the
oh,
only
this
honest thing
is
there
what I am.
is.
Yeah.
It's the only honest thing there is. And the flip side is, there's like there's an old like story or parable. It's probably not, parable is not the right word, but of like some dude who was who always wanted to he wanted God to demonstrate himself to be real for him. And he was the most pious of individuals, and he kept on saying, God, I need you to show me you're real. Just give me one sign and I will do this and I'll do this and this. And he had a younger brother, and his younger brother was always kind of getting him in his way. It's like, hey, what are you doing? Johnny, let's go out and play. And he's like, don't you see, I'm doing serious spiritual work. I'm trying to connect with God. And so the older brother eventually gets to this relationship with God, with the universe, whatever it is. And he's like, I'm going to go up on top of this mountain, and I'm going to go with no food. I'm going to go with no water, and you must provide for me. And if you do not, then this whole thing is a sham. And so the guy goes up to the top of the mountain. The little brother goes and asks Mom. He's like, Mom, where's my older brother? And she's like, oh, he's up on top of the mountain. And he's like, when did he go? Last night. Well, what did he bring with him? He brought nothing. Little brother's like, damn, he must be
He's
hungry.
dumb. Yeah.
So let me go and fill all this food up, this bag with food and water. And he goes all the way to the top of the mountain. He goes to the top of the mountain, and the older brother's there, and he's so friggin' hungry. And he's like, but he's waiting for God, and he's angry at God. And the little brother's like, I brought you this food. And the brother's like, get out of here. He's like, okay. And he leaves the bag of food and he leaves away. And the whole idea is, we get what we need.
Yeah.
It just doesn't line up necessarily in the way we think it does. We have these false expectations.
Yeah. Which relates back to that visualization thing too.
Exactly. The truth is reality. Being able to have a clear lens to see reality as it is with having less and less influence from your perspective. I would say it's probably impossible to have no perspective. But
Well, I think that's that thing that's like 3 levels back. Like there is a part of you with no filter or whatever, no perspective. I just think it's like ridiculously hard to connect with that idea because we're so biased and filtered through our experiences and our idea,
Yeah, that view doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like if you were at that view, like you wouldn't care about all the things you do care about.
Right. Which
Because
is
you'd
like
be
part of what they say, like, the reason why people aren't enlightened is because they don't want to be. It's like do you really want to be like fully detached from all the things you're attached to? Like part of why you're attached to all those things is because you want it, you enjoy it, you like it, and it's who you are.
Yeah. I mean, there's all of those things. They're addiction. We all have these addictions, but then there's also like, there's a richness of life. Like I always like this idea of, sliding into your coffin, like just like beaten up as much as you can, but having like the richest life experiences possible. That speaks to me. So I don't know.
That.
It's like, I also like the monk thing. Like that speaks to me as well. So,
yeah,
it's confusing isn't the right word. It's open. It's open. Right. And it's like, integrity and authenticity and joy, those are the truth monitors, I suppose, how much you have it.
I love it. I love it. So should we wrap things up?
I think so. How long have we been talking? I don't even know.
I don't even know either. I think it's been 2 hours. So
perfect. That was good.
It's a good place to wrap it up. I was going to ask a few final questions for you. And one is, where would you send people to get more of you? I know that we have susquehannaalchemy.com.
Yeah, you could go there. The website's a disaster.
I liked it. I love all these visual things that you can click on.
I've got lots of stuff. It's not well organized. Like my intention was good, and then user experience and like all this stuff, like people I know about who know a lot of those sort of things. Like I think I did a pretty good job for a guy who doesn't know what he's doing. So there's a lot of content there. I just recently, like a month ago, just started doing Instagram, and all I do is I make all of these. I take like little pieces of like Susquehanna mystery, and I talk about like, and I try to go like one post each day, and it's either like Susquehanna mystery or it has to do with like this really what I think is interesting computer art, which I'm making.
Cool.
All stories, and then sometimes about some of the tools I've made, like the one I told you about with the Aikido master. So
Yeah.
that's a cool place. Like if you want to follow, I do starboard ceremonies, which is like it's astrologically based, but it's more so in the same approach that if you're familiar with the Susquehanna mystery, which is, that's the whole Susquehanna River thing. Like I put that on someone based upon their astrological chart. I look at it, and then I build it, and on this tool I made called the Starboard. So it takes astrology from being this very, very like abstract concept, and it becomes real. And if anyone's interested in something like that, I do those remotely and in person. But you can
Cool.
get that on my website, and also Rights of the 40th Parallel, which is a detailed guide of this epicenter, which was so significant to the Rosicrucians and to a lot of Native people. And it identifies 4 different locations right at the Susquehanna River at the 40th parallel, which is about an hour north of Baltimore or an hour and a half west of Philadelphia. And first I describe everything physically, and then I describe how these physical things that we can see, how they're reflections of spiritual truths or archetypes, and then tie that into different sort of ways of tying it into the human experience, whether like this is where you come for destruction, where you want to let go of something, or this is where you go for inspiration, because now that you've destroyed something, you need to fill that up because nature abhors a vacuum. And then this is where you go for balance, and everything is in alignment, like the physical, the intention. And that's a guidebook, and I have that on my website, which can be ordered for $20. And that's about it. And also YouTube. So like any of those sort of things, like people could just contact me if they're interested in any of that sort of stuff. And I love doing starboard sessions. It's really my favorite thing. I love getting into people's stories.
So when people do a starboard session, would they expect you to be reading sort of their overall, I don't know, like kind of personality and way of interacting in the world? Or is it like a future sort of thing, or
No, not at all. Okay, so that's a great question. So what they would receive is, so I videotape. The starboard is there are 2 discs, 36 inches across is the larger one, and I build someone's chart. And I interpret their natal chart. So this is the placement of the planets at the time of birth. And I do it in a very poetic way. And there is a great compassion, sympathy, and understanding with what I would call shadow aspects. Huh. And so I say it's a ceremony because it's an introduction. It's like, this is the shadow side. And if you're astrologically, if you speak the language, like I pay specific attention to like Moon and Pluto and 8th house and hard aspects, and all of the things, like that's what I'm kind of drawn to. So it's a general kind of reading, and it's definitely about the information, but it's much more so than that. Like everything about it, particularly when it's done in person, is about honoring what it's like to be you.
Yeah.
Because each of us is blind to how we are unique. It's like how we're all blind to the atmosphere, to gravity. Like at any given point in your life, you've been in gravity. Yet if you had to describe what gravity feels like, you wouldn't be able to do so because you've never not had it. And you have always been you, and the way you receive information and the way you express yourself, you go after things, the way all of these different things that make up you from a deeper level, even before experiences, we're blind to, because we've never not known what it is to be within our own skin. So it's really an approach, or a way of introducing someone to that aspect of themselves, which tends to then be very, very accepting. Accepting of, like, doesn't mean like I go and I don't stop my self-destructive or my self whatever behaviors. It's more so stepping out of that space and just recognizing, listen, it ain't easy.
Yeah.
And look, and at the end of the day, everything I say, I guarantee you already know.
True.
That's why it feels so right. It's because you're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, which is so helpful. I want to do that now. That was a great description of that. That sounds amazing. And I think that's something that like you're right, people don't realize how unique and special they are, and people also don't always want to look at their shadow side and their destructiveness. So both are a beautiful gift to have.
Yeah.
But that's cool. I'm gonna have to set that up with you. And
Definitely.
then I'm wondering if you have you've said very many wise and wonderful things this whole episode, but do you have any final words of wisdom that you want to send out to the listeners?
Yeah, I'm gonna give two easy things.
Okay.
So the first thing is, we talked about the heart. So I learned this from my chiropractor, and this guy is amazing. Go to the right when you hug people. Don't go to the left. So think about hugging someone. You go to
I
the right.
always go to the left.
Everyone goes to the left. When you go to
Shit.
the left, you are lining up your liver. And so this is the part of your body which is putting off the biggest signal, and you're lining up your liver energy, you're lining up your detox energy. When you go
Whoa.
to the right, you go heart to heart.
You just changed my life, Michael.
Changed my life when I started doing it. It's also fun because when you do that, like, at first it's going to feel very awkward.
Wow.
When you know someone who knows that too, you'll look at each other and be like, oh,
You're like,
yeah,
yes.
you know, heart to heart. And like, other people don't even say anything, just go and do it. They just go along with you. So there's that. And at least for me, this is my approach. We can get caught up in our head, you know, good guy, bad guy, blah, blah, blah. Everything's relationships. And there is one relationship which we know, which the entire physical world is built upon, and that's the phi ratio, or the golden ratio. And the more you can understand that, and then say, how do I apply this in everything? Because everything is a relationship. And phi ratio is built upon harmony with the larger and harmony with the smaller. So that if you can learn how to utilize that in whatever creative way you can, you are constantly putting yourself in harmony with the larger and the smaller, regardless of what you're harmonizing with. Those are my two things.
Well, those are excellent keys to hand out. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. This was very enjoyable. I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. I've enjoyed it as well. I appreciate your time. So, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Michael. Michael, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
The road is long with many a winding, as they say, and it is excellent to follow along with others who are walking with their eyes open. We are stronger in connection, and we are wisest when we listen. So thank you to all of our listeners out there. And as always, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.